La députée d'Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Although I've been agreeably surprised to see that we are going to do something about rural telecommunications, I'm a bit disappointed that we have a motion at the end of a mandate where some of the requests or asks will not take place because of the period of time left to us. And so it probably won't go forward, given where we are in the parliamentary calendar. I'd like to point out the efforts by the member for Pontiac about improving digital infrastructure in rural regions, but one would have hoped that the government could have acted sooner, because it's now been 3.5 years that I've been asking for help in greater cellular coverage. There are people who don't have this coverage, and this means a lot of problems at the level of public security and safety. And also, in the motion, they're asking the Public Safety Committee to deal with wireless communications. But I think everyone realizes, I think it's obvious, but if there's a road accident and you don't have cell coverage, or you may have to walk miles in the dead of night in a rural region where there are wild animals, and you may even have children with you. I think everyone understands that you can realize that it's very unsafe when we think of the 70s. Well, cell phones didn't exist, but if you had an accident in the middle of nowhere, that was one thing. But now the technology is there, and there are people, for example, in regions like Africa, where people were surprised to see how easy it was to have access to cell phones everywhere. I worked in Senegal for a while, and cell phones worked everywhere in West Africa. Even in the little village I was in, but in some tiny villages it might not have worked, but overall it worked well. Here we are, a G7 country. We have a quite significant volume of cellular communications. And I think the fact that some people aren't covered has become a matter of public safety and security. And having cell phones that work can mean life or death. So I think this going forward with this study is completely useless if you want to demonstrate how important it is to have a wireless network. And I consider that the minister has sufficient data to be able to move forward and invest in necessary infrastructure, realizing the impact this will have on public safety. That was one of the first points I wanted to make. Something else that's also important to discuss when we talk about wireless, and this was cited in the Auditor General's report when he discussed Internet access strategy, is not having a national strategy. The government, does these programs and investments sort of piece by piece without really knowing where they're headed, and this has significant consequences. Sometimes they'll put something, they'll invest in one business, they'll invest in another program, and then there's a business that has a subsidy for something else, and this one business is a competitor of the other. And things just, there's a vicious circle, so to speak. And the matter of rural digital infrastructure is not helped or advanced. You don't know if what's put in place is really effective or if there are competitors. And perhaps they've invested in the private sector rather than in another sector of the economy. All this is very regrettable, and it's regrettable that we don't have a more global vision. We're also really late with respect to programs implemented for wireless communications. For example, the latest programs were targeting speeds well below what would be expected. The CRTC expects that for internet speed, people should have access to 50 megabytes per second. And this is, I think, what is usually expected for wireless and cell communication. Now they're talking about 5,000 per second. So it's high time that the government brought in measures to create a program that we look at the various requests for investment or for help. But in the end, when all this is done, very often things are already out of date vis-a-vis the actual needs. Another program I would have liked to see is that we seem to be ignoring areas where wireless communications are important, are especially important. For example, telemedicine, where it's highly important that people be able to communicate with specialists, especially in rural regions where they don't have specialists, so that people can deal with a physician. They can do this. They can have exam results dealt with. They can consult people by telemedicine. Another area where wireless and high-speed internet is really important is education. There's, of course, remote education possibilities. Laval University offers this option. Unfortunately, you need video capacity, you need streaming capacity in order to take advantage of this option. There are people who have no internet, no high-speed internet access that would allow them to take these courses, these online courses. And sometimes they are able to get access, but then when they're billed, they often, at the end of a session, it might be $200 or $300 per month to be able to look at the various videos necessary for their education. I think these people don't have access to education the same way as people in urban areas do. So I appreciate my colleagues' efforts, but I consider that this motion could have been much better if it had been amended or drafted differently. And this is why I would like to move the following amendment, that M-208 be amended, have as a substitute certain words. For example, I want added needs of telemedicine. D, reliable and accessible internet access for long-distance educational courses and to access government services and to provide access to cultural life. D, the government should continue to help Canadians in rural areas to have the digital infrastructure necessary for their economy and to maintain public safety and security. to invest in digital infrastructure in rural areas, and to have the federal government invest and help the private sector invest in connectivity. 3, continue to work with telecommunications businesses in the provinces and municipalities, Indigenous groups, and to prioritize digital infrastructure for these people. The government should also continue to help Canadians in rural regions have the digital infrastructure they need and ensure that investments, public funds in digital infrastructure will make sure that wireless is there and that public investments can stand in for private investments. They also need to ensure the cooperation of provincial and municipal governments and Indigenous communities. E, substitute the Standing Committee on Industry with the Standing Committee on Industry, to delete the word massif, to have the to go forward with an exhaustive study of wireless infrastructure to ensure public safety and security, and to bring it back to the House as soon as possible. I must inform the honourable member that pursuant to the standing order, that any amendment to a motion can only be moved with the sponsor of the motion. So I would ask the honourable member for Pontiac if he consents to the moving of this motion.
There is no consent. Therefore, pursuant to Standing Order 93.3, the amendment cannot be moved.